With Rob Lewis, Brent Hubbs, Volquest.com. A little top 5 action. Tennessee versus Mississippi State. Rob, maybe not the 5 best games in terms of Tennessee history with SEC matchups, but this series has produced some significant moments for Tennessee when you look at Tennessee versus Mississippi State, which we'll see at noon on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, there's not been, a great game, so to speak, but there have been some notable games that Tennessee needed across several, championship seasons. I mean, one that I can remember, it wouldn't jump out to a lot of people, but 2007, 33-21, Tennessee ends up being a crucial game for Tennessee getting to Atlanta the year, when kind of the bounce back year when nobody really saw it.
Right, with David Cuck, Lucas Taylor, a big game in that. Daniel Lincoln had a big game in there. Then there's some other memorable games in there that were wins, and some of those were obviously losses as well. The lasting image of Derek Dooley in the wheelchair, Cordell Patterson had his head cocked back, weaving around everybody. Looked like he was in a PlayStation game. And an ugly loss for Tennessee in Dooley's last year.
Yeah, I mean, Dooley coaching from the press box, and who can ever? I mean, it was just a perfect image for Tennessee football that year. Unfortunately, Derek Dooley being wheeled down to the post-game locker room in a wheelchair with the leg in a brace, but Cordell, there were several moments that year, but that's one of those where, and I've said it before, but he was like the best high school player on a field where you just pitching the ball. Right. You just get, and he did it, but the fact that he did it at the SEC level was just incredible.
Yeah, then you look at some other memorable moments, fumble Rooski's an illegal play that Philip Fulmer put in, and a huge win there that, Daphne takes that around left end and goes to the end zone.
And that's another one of those, it was part of a championship season. It's kind of it's kind of funny how many times you've seen Mississippi State pop up on the schedule in a year where maybe it wasn't the biggest win of the year, but it was one win when Tennessee ended up winning an SEC title, and that was one of them in 1990.
Casey Clausen played in the game where he had 5 touchdown passes in a game at Mississippi State, and a win down there is another game that wasn't a big deal, but it was a big game individually for Casey Clausen. The 98 game in the championship where T rallies at the half, Tennessee's down. You got Kevin Fant with the punt return. Tennessee looks like they're in trouble, and then bam, T. Martin, who was not real good that game, hits 2 big bombs.
And that's one where I think most people. It's been a long time ago, but that's one where it felt like Tennessee should have rolled, and they didn't. They found themselves in a dogfight. They ended up winning 21-14, mostly on the strength of the defense and a couple big plays. So If Mississippi State pulls the upset in that game, can you imagine how different Tennessee football feels for the last quarter century? That was a big one in hindsight.
And it's interesting. Many people who played in that game, from freshmen like Will Overstreet to veterans who were on that team, say that was the hardest game to get up for because you just finished the undefeated season and you knew what had happened throughout the day, and here you are, getting a chance to go to the national championship game, you think, and it's a team you're heavily favored by. It's the famous Doug Dickey speech who was in town. Doug Dickey comes in the locker room in Vanderbilt after they go unbeaten, and everybody's thinking about championships. He goes, hey, you lose this one next Saturday, you're going to the Citrus Bowl. But it's one of those deals where all those guys talked about just how hard that game was to play, to turn around and play it a week later. And then finally, for me, the biggest game in this series was a loss, ironically. Tennessee turns it over 5 times. Tennessee stumbling in 1994, but that's where you found out Peyton Manning had a chance to be Peyton Manning because he burst on the scene in that game.
And I think just kind of, again, a loss, but the birth of a legend. The birth of the sheriff in Knoxville. I think the Brandon Stewart controversy maybe lingered in the minds of some people, after that for a few weeks, but I think it was apparent to a lot of people after that day in Starkville that, hey, 16 is the guy.
Joey Kent, I think, had 11 catches in that game, but the lasting image is Peyton Manning turning to his left and he throws an out to Kendrick Jones. Maybe the only ball Kendrick Jones caught in his Tennessee career that anybody remembers, but Peyton hit him on a frozen rope on an out that Jones turned up the field for a touchdown. And everybody who watched football, and all of us who had watched practice, and Peyton had thrown ducks in the preseason and everything else, for that ball to go through right there, everybody went, whoa, that one's totally different, and it was for the next 4 years.
And then they ended up finishing that season on a high note.
Yeah, certainly did, finishing out with a big bowl win over Virginia Tech. Again, not the greatest series in Tennessee history in terms of 5 great games, but certainly some big-time moments in the history of this program. Tennessee and Mississippi State, the 2 teams will get together Saturday at noon in Neyland Stadium. For Rob Lewis, I'm Brent Hubbs.